Well, Dan Goddard, welcome. And thank you very much for taking time out for our conversation today. I really appreciate it. I wanted to start off, one of the reasons I was really have been looking, when we've known each other through family connections for a number of years, but one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that you see so much of the sort of life science ecosystem, particularly in the startup space, particularly, with companies, with founders that you work with and so forth. So I wanted to start off a little bit about telling people about your background and sort of how you got to that, and then talk a little bit about where you see this sort of ecosystem that you help lead, where you see that today, given everything that's going on.
It's great to be here, Johnny, it really is, it's amazing to think that, we've been friends as connections for over 20 years now, and I think that 20-year kind of gives a unique perspective on the trends and cycles within the industry. So background for me is I've been doing early stage life science now in Boston for just about 20 years, and I actually stumbled into it inadvertently. I don't have a PhD. I've got an English degree and went to work in a law firm in the earliest days and actually got introduced from a partner there to PureTech Ventures at the time that later became PureTech Health. This was the earliest stages of hub and spoke models of company creation, and I actually came in as the accounts payable manager of all things.
Did you really? I didn't know that.
There, yeah, in the first 10 people. And as I joined it, I realized that there was more work to be done. So I held down the fort doing the accounts payable, and that led to accounting responsibilities, and then it led to company creation responsibilities and partnering with EIRs. When you start early in a venture, there's always more problems than there are solutions. And for the duration of my time there, I was a person that just ran towards problems and ran towards fires. And over the course of the time I was there, I actually left as a manager of administration and finance and had been on the ground of about 12 portcos, had seen the organization grow with significant capital raises, and had a chance to connect with science at its earliest stage. After about 7 years at PureTech, I pursued another passion. I have always been very emotional and attached to oceanography, towards environmental impact, and did a 4-year stint with a company called Nortec that actually made instruments that measured wave heights and water velocities and turbulence. And
being
not
into
only
sailing,
oceanography.
I know Nortec, yeah.
Yep. But, environmental impact, alternative energy, and did that for 4 years. And it was a tremendous experience. And I think what I took away from that was entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship in various forms. And there is overlap from startup to startup, regardless of industry. And around 2015, I actually got a call from Eddie Martucci, which was a PureTech founder that was making a digital therapeutic called Achille Interactive, to join the team, and came in as really the first operational hire for them. Went on a 4-year hiatus with that, where we jumped in and we actually built a digital therapeutic that ultimately ended up getting approved by the FDA. It was really a novel treatment that had meaningful impact on patients and adolescent ADHD and other cognitive issues, and went through the process of taking the company public.
Well, and it was the first digital therapy to actually get approved by the FDA. So that process was incredible.
No,
it was quite a process for the company.
Yeah, we were pioneers, and I think, where I thrived in that environment because nobody knew how to do it. We were doing something for the very first time. And I feel like for a generalist like me with a background in early stage, those environments of the unknown are really where my experience thrives. After Achille, I really wasn't sure what to do next, and realized that not being academic, I had never really had much exposure to traditional science funding, NSF, NIH, and DARPA. Spent a couple of years with a group in Somerville called Microleads Medical that was doing neural modulation for pain management. They had awards from NSF, NIH, and DARPA. So really took a deep dive in understanding how those programs work, and everything from the application process and grant submitting to change amendments and orders, as well as the audits that come with it. And it was a tremendous experience to really see closer to academic science and how that works. Then COVID hit, and really wanted to transition back to a remote job, but also realized that I missed working for more than one company. One of the best parts about the earliest days of PureTech is we always had 3 or 4 different ventures going at one time.
Yeah, I know from having done a lot of consulting, I really enjoy the variation that comes with that. I can see that.
And I think there's a benefit there too, as you see more things. You really like to spread your impact out and have a broader impact on the industry. So did 4 years with a group called Brown Consulting that at its core was a financial services firm, but really because it was biotech specific, had a chance to open up a lot of doors where we were able to do a lot more than that. And over those 4 years, I spearheaded the creation of a team there that did the stand-up and launch of, God, just about 100 biotech. And I feel
Really?
like that's
Wow.
an inflated number, but this was 2020. There were companies getting funded, right and
Right.
left every 2 weeks. There was a continual influx, and it was a tremendously rewarding experience. And not only helping the founders on this journey, but also actually building up a firm that supported entrepreneurship and supported an industry that I was so passionate about. After 4 years there, really wanted to see what it was like closer to the bench, closer to the incubator space. And as great as remote work is, I still feel that science happens on the bench. It's nice to be close to science. It's nice to be at least near the lab and to celebrate those wins and victories with the scientists. So did 10 months with Portal Innovation as director of platform and ecosystem there as they were launching their Boston site. And it was a tremendously rewarding experience. We were able to get them on the map, establish a platform, really start to gather a community. And, we had many events where we had 200-300 people coming,
Yeah,
and
I
that
mean,
led to the
Portal's
opportunity.
become very well known in the Boston market. Yeah, no,
And
that's
then just connecting with founders and helping, which was a tremendous benefit. And
yeah.
along that journey, I actually connected with a group called CFGO that's another financial services firm that I think is unique in that they actually are made up of previous operators that have been in startups. So I actually just recently joined there a few weeks ago as Director of Business Development and Client Success. So I have a
Congratulations.
really non-traditional background, and it's kind of a long sorted tale. Yes, I speak with founders that are looking for career advice. Sometimes I actually hesitate and struggle because I feel like I am where I am through a series of fortuitous bounces, a great network, and just a willingness to try new things and say yes to opportunities.
Yeah, I assume though that that's really beneficial to the founders that you work with though, because you do have that varied experience that you can pull different things from, pull different threads for different situations. I would imagine that people find that really valuable. And a lot of the founders, except for maybe some of the younger ones who maybe just come out of grad school and so forth, but a lot of founders you see have very varied backgrounds, have tried different things and so forth. So I'm sure they really appreciate the sort of the width and breadth of your background because it brings some organizational maturity to what they're trying to do.
And the irony is every now and then I catch myself actually using my English degree because the ability to write clearly and communicate and understand the dynamics of a good story, it still applies to the industry that we use.
And while living
Yeah.
in home with the scientists, I completely get that. Could you explain it to me like I'm two? Because I have no idea what you're talking about.
100%.
No, that's great. So I'm curious, having gone through these various iterations, Dan, as to what you sort of are seeing in the startup founder space right now. I mean, obviously you were just at Bio, so I'm curious as to what your takeaways were there, and more specific to Boston, what you're sort of seeing in this in the ecosystem that is life sciences in Boston right now.
Yeah. And I think, with a broad perspective, there's a lot of interesting studies and research that show that, particularly in academia, most of the institutions and the researchers are generally focused on platform technologies. And if you think about researching platforms, that's generally how scientific discovery moves forward as an industry, right? Identifying new targets, identifying new mechanisms of action that can be explored. And I think where we are now as a market is economically, investment has shifted more towards direct assets going directly into clinic in a shorter time period. There's less of an appetite from an investment perspective on pursuing a pure platform technology that could lead to advancement. And, over the course of my career, I've seen these things intersect and diverge at various times. And I feel like right now we're just in a period where the venture market looking for assets and the academic research that's looking at platforms are the furthest apart that I can remember them being.
So like an mRNA would be tougher these days for people to look at as a potential platform technology because people are sort of going for more point solutions, more faster commercialization type things is what you're really seeing in the
100%. And I also think, especially in the market right now, that there's a lot of great assets that are not proven, but have positive phase 1A or 1B data that are low-hanging fruit for the investment community, where they can come in and say, you know what, this is generally de-risked. We've got to put some capital in, and naturally there's risk as you progress through trials, but it's not the same inherent risk of jumping into an early stage platform that
Right.
may or may not produce assets in a period of 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And I think if you look at the responsibilities of investors, and there are ethics and values involved in investing and all prioritization of it. But at the end of the day, most VCs, the job is to return capital to shareholders. Sometimes the best way to do that is looking at de-risked assets and continuing to move those forward. And that's really in line with, I think, the values of the industry as well, where ultimately these are therapies that are going to impact patients in a shorter timeline. But where that leaves a gap is really moving the needle of technology and science forward in leaps and bounds, which is a role that's traditionally been filled by grant funding.
So sort of big science sort of pushed, to use the political term, the can gets kicked down the road kind of thing for point solutions that can be turned around and commercialized. Now, I'm curious, do you think that's because of uncertainty in the market right now, that just the sense of things are so uncertain, or it was sort of the direction that you saw things going over the last few years anyway?
I think it really comes down to the focus of founders. And a lot of articles will talk about that people generally coming from a pharma background or coming from a commercial background are much more inclined to lean towards, hey, let's get this asset into patients, let's get it to market, right? We're going to take 1 or 2 assets and we're going to drive these forward. And it's less of an academic pursuit, whereas you find, on the academic side, it's, can we explore this? Will this work? This is new science. Can we try this? And that opens one door, which leads to another door, which leads to another door, which is ultimately how, technology moves forward and how science moves forward. But occasionally these things, like I said, just diverge from each other. And I feel like we're at that point in that pure science for science sake in opening doors and leading to new horizons is just going to get deprioritized, while there's this immediate impact of compounds, peptides, antibodies, things that can be produced and pushed into patients in a very short timeline and have a real impact.
Do you think, though, that part of the reason that big science is sort of getting pushed aside, or maybe this is exacerbating it, is what's gone on with the federal government in terms of academia? That federal government was really a big funder of quote unquote big science, of experimental ideas, or looking at platforms, as you talk about, and so forth. And that right now is, to say it's in an influx is a bit of an understatement. That is right now sort of up in the air in terms of how that all falls out.
Yeah, and I think the federal funding for sure is definitely a part of the equation. And I don't think anyone has a crystal ball as to, what's going to happen and what the future of federal funding is going to look like. I can say from speaking with founders that, grants are still moving through. Not all of them. There's definitely some challenges, and I've heard both that things have been funded and I've heard that funding has been pulled. So I think the messaging has been inconsistent about that. Really what concerns me, particularly around the federal funding piece, is grant funding has always gone through cycles, depending on economic swings and administration changes. But if you look at the larger picture of kind of where human health, vaccination, where the CDC sits, I think we're seeing a politicalization of science right now in this current administration that I think is all kind of a longer term danger, actually, even than
a
the
negative
funding.
politicization. Yeah, it's a negative connotation, sort of
For
like the whole
sure.
vaccine discussion. It's right. Yeah,
And I
I think
really
that's the
see
case.
parallels there, similar to, when climate change first came out, right? And, climate change first came out, and there was a lot of great scientific evidence that showed that, yes, our planet is changing and there's a real impact and we need to act on it. But at the same time, they were able to locate scientists that had different opinions, and, not to put merit on the science or weigh, who's right or who's wrong on that, but they were able to build a case that actually led to long-term development and funding for programs that would reduce climate change or have an impact. That's continued to decline year over year under administrations. And I really have concerns that we're on a similar path with science right now, where as this politicalization of science comes in and that there's more doubt and skepticism, I think it erodes the public trust that science is valid.
Yeah, no, I think
And if
that's
science is invalid, there's no reason to fund it.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the case. I'm fascinated. The Boston Globe, either yesterday or today, had a piece on how Harvard is now going out to corporations and trying to get sponsorships, which is probably the wrong word, but it's trying to get funding from corporations to sort of help fill the gap. It'll be, because if anybody can do that, certainly Harvard has the contacts and so forth, and the alumni to sort of be able to do that. It'd be interesting to see how far they're able to get with that. Hopefully it will actually fill some gap, at least in the interim. But it's interesting to see that that's where they're going in terms of trying to fill some of the gap.
That's actually been a dramatic change that I've seen over the 20 years in my career, is the movement of corporations backing into academia at an earlier and earlier state. I think are just a trend. You know, it used to be when I first started this industry that things truly spun out of academia.
Right.
But now if you look at some of these larger institutions, you're actually seeing corporate interest coming earlier and earlier into the process and earlier into labs, to the point that some universities are looking at PE backing for labs and say, you know what, if we build this, private equity is here to play. And I think that is right now, unfortunately, a necessary evil, just with the uncertainty that we're living. And I can't really put a benchmark if it will be a good or bad thing. You know, what I will say is I think it puts a lot more pressure on the integrity and the morality of these PEs to act in the public interest versus a private interest. And I think some people will be great at balancing that, but it wouldn't surprise me if others weren't so great or failed at it.
And also the universities to stay focused on public outcomes versus trying to do saleable science as it were, because then we start going down the same path we were just talking about earlier, which is looking for things that are quickly commercial and can be quickly commercialized versus things that have strong impact across the board for the public.
Come into that though, I think there's a balance there, because I've always remained very patient-centric in my approach, and that's a big part of the reason that I've stayed in life sciences so long. And there is something to be said for these quick assets that can fill an unmet need, that can improve the quality of life for patients and have great therapeutic outcomes. But I feel like there does need to be a balance with this larger pie in the sky type platform development. That's what is possible, what is the next thing, what's the thing after that, and this exploratory science that actually keeps moving those direct assets forward.
And also builds a long-term pipeline. I mean, the thing that I'm really curious about now is, there are a lot of solutions that are available and so forth for funding and commercialization, as you talked about. But what's it look like in 5 years? Because where we see funding being pulled is stuff that would be interesting in terms of potential pipeline for companies and changes in science down the line.
I think where we'll see the most impact on that, and it's unfortunate, but I think we'll see the most impact in women's health. And I think we'll see the most impact in rare disease.
Yeah.
And these are,
that's fair.
Segments of our industry that have traditionally lagged behind.
That's right.
Because the economics, I guess you could say for rare disease, the economics isn't always there to make sense. But we're seeing models now like, QC McPherson and Alpha Rose trying to change this paradigm that, rare disease can't be scaled and can't be profitable. And I think women's health is a unique issue, and that there is the market there. But there's a host of issues around reimbursement. There's a host of issues even around awareness and around funding. And I think we'll see those areas of science continue to lag behind. And I think that's just going to be exacerbated by this lack of funding.
Yeah. And I think to your point about the politicization of science too, one of the parts of the politicization was this whole DEI discussion, right? So we're going to pull out grants that may have some supposed DEI component. Well, that's, and part of that is inevitably going to be women's health. And so, I think part of the unfortunate part of the politicization has been that we're seeing at-risk populations being pushed further down in terms of the opportunity for scientific outcomes that could benefit them.
And I think that's actually, I think it's very true in women's health. And I think it's also true with minority-specific diseases. There's been a great erosion of trust, and in many cases with great reason, of even getting diversification in clinical trials, because there really isn't a lot of faith that even if the drug is approved, that it will ever be accessible to the communities that actually need it.
Right. It's funny because I worked for a hospital system during the pandemic, and that was a huge issue among amongst immigrant and minority populations in terms of trust of the vaccine and so forth. And you sort of extrapolate that to larger trust of science, and that you're absolutely right. That is historically been a problem, and it's being sort of exacerbated now by virtue of, what's happening in the media and the political sphere and so forth.
Well, the other thing that's accelerating it, and not to undermine the concern about vaccinations, which is completely valid, especially in minority populations with the U.S. history.
Right.
But even if you look at Vertex with the sickle cell, when you're working on a vaccine that's relatively cheap to produce, and at least at the beginning of the pandemic, they were giving them away for free. When you start to get into like more cell and gene therapies and treatments that cost millions of dollars, that erosion of trust, I think, is even greater exacerbated, because it's not necessarily that they don't believe in the science, but they actually don't believe that they'll ever be able to afford it, or that a payer will actually let them receive this treatment.
Right. Dan, I'm just going to shut the door because I can hear our dog walker and Scotty talking downstairs. Hold on one second. Let's switch it up a little bit and talk about bio, because it really seemed like it was, despite everything that's going on, a very successful conference. And I'm curious as to what your takeaways were, what you sort of heard and saw, what you see as sort of upcoming and so forth out of the conference last week.
Yeah, and I mean, I probably have a unique perspective on this, but I'm one of those people that truly believes if you get 20 or 30,000 people together that are passionate about the same cause, it naturally just wills some optimism into existence. And if you think back over history, there's been so many years that people coming out of bio or people coming out of JP Morgan in January, that there's optimism, and I feel like that optimism is just a natural symptom of bringing this many like-minded people together. But in terms of the overall tone of the conference, I think it was more subdued this year. I think there is a reflection on an uncertainty right now that the whole industry is facing, and a discomfort. I think a lot of that is driven by the political administration and kind of the uncertainties around HHS, what the future of the FDA looks like. And also, I think around the funding climate and just seeing few startups actually moving forward. But I think what their celebration is, and kind of what the momentum is that there is still great science being done. There's still deals happening. There are still trials that are having successful readouts. And despite all of the negative news that, sometimes has a greater impact, I think there's a bias to focus on the negative. And when you get these people together, there were a lot of hugs, a lot of high fives, a lot of celebration around the people that were winning this and actually having an impact. So for me, actually being at bio was far more about being part of the community than I think tactically trying to make a deal. And I feel like that's such an important part of this industry, because at the end of the day, what we do is hard. It has a tremendous failure rate. There are far easier ways to make money and probably lead a productive life than working in early stage biotech and trying to develop medicines. But when you bring the community together like that, it does generate this hope and optimism and belief in the future, despite the opposition that it's currently facing.
So did you take away from that a sense of resilience then, in terms of the industry being able to sort of overcome current environment and work towards a future environment? Did you sort of get a sense that, as difficult as it is, there is a sense of resilience in the industry?
I think really, and looking back on some of the conversations I had, is I think it really depends on the experience levels of the people that you talk to. And naturally being in this for a long time, some of the best conversations I've had that are people that have been by my side for 20 years, that have seen recessions, that have gone through 08 and 09 and seen the industry bounce back multiple times. And I think those perspectives really embrace the resilience and understanding that this industry is cyclical, just like every other industry. And there is enough core foundations that despite opposition and in some cases threats, that it will bounce back. But I think a lot of that needs to be relayed and communicated to a generation that maybe started this in 2020 or 2019, that's 5 years into this, where they've seen a spike and they've seen a downturn, but they haven't seen a turnaround yet. And so it really depends on the ages of the people that you were talking about and how long they've been in this industry.
I can see that, having, being older myself and having lived through. I mean, I remember one of my first jobs was to run a Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Commerce in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And there was a point when the economy was so bad, I literally would wait on Friday afternoon for FDIC to call me to tell me that one of the banks in the community was actually going to be taken over by the federal government. I mean, that's how people forget, but the real estate market and everything sort of of fell out. So I think you're right. I think there is that perspective from people who are older, who have been through various machinations in the economy. And the economy's been good, particularly in Massachusetts, for a while now. So we tend to sort of have forgotten, that it can go the other way. But having said that, I'm really curious as to how you advise founders, because I'm sure a lot of those founders are from that younger group. And how do you sort of advise them in terms of dealing with the current situation, because capital takes longer, because of, a really dynamic environment and so forth? How are you advising people?
I mean, it really is, it's tricky. And, naturally it depends on the founder and their technology and where they are in the process. So there's a variation there, but a lot of the communication that has been out there and what I've had conversations is surviving right now is the new winning. If you can keep the company alive and keep some degree of research moving forward right now, that's a victory. Not all of the companies are going to be moving ahead, and naturally some of them are going to, as I meet founders that are, unfortunately on that path where things may not move forward or they're going to have to close down the company or shift priorities, I'm still encouraging them to stay in this industry and to try it again. You meet a lot of founders out there that are doing all of the right things, but in a different economy, they would be funded. Their science might be moving forward. They may have received a grant. This technology would be moving. And it's not to absolve them of the responsibility. Founders still need to be lean. They still need to make good decisions. They still need to be capital conscious and move science forward and also tell a great story while they're raising. But it's not uncommon that you meet people that are doing everything right, but still not getting the results that they anticipated. And just sharing the experience and saying that's part of the process of this. And, you often see it. And the example I usually use is, there's a lot of talk about repeat founders and founders that have exits. And, I can tell you that many of the founders that I've known that have had success early on followed up with a failure. It's very rare that you meet people that are
the sophomore failure. Yeah, exactly.
That are 3 for 3 in this and saying, what, just because they've done this and just because there's a track record, it's not a guarantee of future success, especially not in this industry. And it's giving them kind of the inverse of messages that said, hey, what, your first startup didn't work out, but that doesn't mean that the next one is not going to be great and that circumstances are going to be different, or the next pivot or molecule or version of your technology isn't going to have an impact on human health. It's trying to kind of coach them on that resilience, that there's the factors that you can control, and there's also a lot of factors in this industry that are just well beyond your control.
And how are you sort of advising them in terms of the tactical piece, so operations and finances and things like that? I'm sure there's a lot of discussion about trying to use AI elements to try to save costs and so forth. What are you seeing in terms of operationally, how people are managing now? And has that really changed at all given the current environment?
Oh, it's changed tremendously. And I think what we're seeing more of daily is AI being involved to really drive the target and focus and derive as much certainty as possible about every decision that's being made. And that's, everything from compound development to medchem to even choosing clinical trial sites. I think what the offsetting factor of that is that also leads to this influx of more fractional work being done. It's when I first started in this industry, we were building labs. Like, there wasn't a shared incubation space. It was like, okay, we're going to raise the Series A and we're going to build a lab and furnish it with everything that we need and be a company. And I think with the influx of incubators, we're seeing the biology and the bench work that needs to happen being done in a cost-effective way. But we're also seeing a lot more virtual companies. And I think Curie Bio is a great example of this model where there is no infrastructure. We've got a team of people that are making decisions and looking at data and guiding the science. And all of that work is being outsourced and done by CROs in a way that's incredibly cost effective and allowing multiple shots on goal with a great degree of capital efficiency.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's interesting. One of the big real estate companies put out a survey, JLL, put out a big survey, and Boston still has by far the most amount of lab space of any city in the U.S. But they were talking about how, first of all, people are much choosier now in terms of how much space they're going to take, where they're going to take it, and so forth. And secondly is this idea of remote-based companies that you may have a science site or a bench site and so forth, but you're not necessarily, the traditional model was you get funded, you set up the office, everybody came to the office and so forth. And that isn't necessarily the path anymore.
No, and I feel like that's actually beneficial in many ways, not only for the founders themselves and not needing to scale up operations in a way that's not moving the science forward, but it's actually beneficial, I think, for the investment community as well, because they're able to get to a inflection or a go, no-go point at a much quicker pace that ultimately
keeps
Well, it keeps capital in the system too. If they
Right.
can do a quick proof of concept and devise that killer experiment and get it done, they're able to preserve capital even with a negative outcome. Well, that goes back to the shareholders and gets redistributed and ultimately reinvested. And in the event that it takes hold, they're actually usually partnering with a firm that can do the scale up and move the science forward and can get them into clinic and IND enabling studies at a much faster rate than if they were going to do all of this work themselves.
Right. Or it gives them a shot to try it another way too. And I know that, so the big focus, as you pointed out, is people trying to hold on to as much cash as possible, because trying to get to a B round or a C round has gotten harder and harder right now, given where things are at.
And I think that's true, especially at the A stage. But I would also actually just back that up into seed. And, at the seed, oftentimes it's proof of concept. It's can we repeat this academic research? And
Right.
how can we do that as quickly and efficiently with as little capital as possible? So even backing up with the seed stage, partnering with a CRO or an external partner to do that initial replication of the data and maybe some exploratory work around enables seed stage companies to actually do this at a lower cost, which generates those candidates that we talked about and assets that can actually get moved forward. It's like, great, now we've got a development candidate. Let's go. And we can raise a
Right.
seed around that and take off.
Is the founder that you're working with now different than you probably would have worked with 10 or 15 years ago? Is there sort of a different profile of the founder that you're working with, or do you see consistency in terms of who tends to step forward into a founding role?
I think that's one of the most beautiful and exciting parts of this industry is even after doing it for 20 years is the profile of a successful founder is unknown and so varied. There really isn't one phenotype out there that has it. And, there's been a lot of books written and a lot of people think that they have the formula for this. But I've seen so many diverse personalities be successful in this industry that it's really hard to say, okay, are they the same or different? And, I've seen successful academic founders. I've seen successful first-time founders that have no biotech experience whatsoever that have come into this maybe from a business background. And then you see naturally, the migration of people that were previous pharma spinning out their own assets. So it's really hard to say that there's a phenotype or kind of a rule book on consistency with it. And I think that's one of the surprises and part of it that makes this industry so valuable is that it is the unknown. But what we really do as an industry is we're pursuing the unknown. And just like with any level of entrepreneurship, that journey is full of surprises.
And that's going to be encouraging, though, in terms of a whole array of folks thinking about moving into the space or thinking about founding a company and so forth, that there isn't necessarily a genotype, as it were. It's not, I came out of HBS and then I did this and then I did this, kind of thing, that people are coming from all kinds of backgrounds and so forth to do this. That's really interesting. I was not expecting that answer, to be honest with you. I was expecting an answer of, here's the personality profile that the VCs look for, here's the educational background, and so forth. It's really interesting to me that it really is across the board.
And to me, that's one of the, the most beautiful things of being in the Boston, Cambridge area. And, having been here for the duration of my career, it's really, I think, impactful to see the range and diversity of the people that come here, not only internationally, but even domestically. Really, Cambridge and Boston is a lighthouse, I think, for the entire world to come here and take a shot at this and do new things.
Right.
Like, let's focus on human health and let's try to have an impact. And that pulls so many different personality types and backgrounds and educational experiences into this ecosystem that I think is part of the reason that it's so successful, but also part of the reason that it's so vibrant.
Yeah. As you look forward, Dan, what do you sort of see future-wise, given everything that's going on, not only in the short term, but just where do you sort of see all this kind of going over the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I think to work in this industry, you to some degree, you have to be an eternal optimist.
It's true.
And things, you really have to have the belief that humanity will move forward, that it can work. In some cases, I think you've got to have short periods where you kind of suspend that disbelief, even in the face of evidence that things may not work. So where I see things heading is I think that, drugs will still be developed. I think a lot of the things that were even started during the COVID time, it's been very promising to see them move out of phase 1 into phase 2, having tremendous meaningful impacts on patients. So I think that we'll continue to see patient impact and we'll continue to see technology move forward. But I also think we need to balance that with a larger sense of purpose about why we do what we do. especially in the face of this public scrutiny over science and kind of the politicization of it that we talked about earlier. But I think we're in a position right now where on the edge of an exciting time in this industry, especially with the influx of AI and the idea that novel compounds can be created and novel therapeutics. And over time, we're going to see the uncertainty slowly start to lift from this drug creation and new therapeutic development process. It's not going to be overnight, but over a period of 5 or 10 years, I think this industry will look radically different from a risk profile as we start to enter into patients in phase 1 and phase 2 to have an idea of what the outcomes probably are.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Humanity benefits from that.
Right. I also think it's going to speed up. I mean, because of just what you mentioned with AI and so forth. When I was working at Takeda, they have a sort of $1 billion investment in a new R&D building that is going into the center of Kendall, sorry. And, part of that is to make it sort of up to the moment scientifically, to be able to bring in AI across the R&D system and so forth. And you're seeing multiple companies do that, particularly in the pharma space. So I do think you're absolutely right. But I also think it's an industry that's just going to get faster and faster by virtue of the ability to take some of that uncertainty out and so forth, and using AI and other tools to do that.
Well, one of the best conversations I actually had at Bio was with a friend who's actually a bio tools investor. And, he had a very interesting point that we're at this age right now, even in terms of existing AI, where we're able to devise therapies that are hellishly expensive to produce, and that there actually is going to be an unmet need right now where we can develop a drug or a compound or cell and gene therapy that is at this point exorbitantly expensive to produce. And really driving to make those accessible is going to be a key factor in this industry too, because AI is going to discover things that are possible but not economical for us to do as a society. Right. So I think we're also going to see an influx of the enablers on the manufacturing side of things, tools for biofermentation, tools for making peptides, and, producing large quantities of these typically historically expensive drugs at scale in a way that makes them more accessible. And it's almost like this cat and mouse game where we can dream it and now we have to build it. And I think we're going to enter this period, I think in the next 5 years, where we're in this gap where, yes, we can dream big and we can devise these incredible therapies, but now we need to actually find a way to make their manufacture and distribution economical as well to have a real patient impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely true. And as you were talking, my thought went right to oncology, because that's a space where, there has been a lot of movement in terms of personalized medicine, in terms of really high-end medicines and so forth. But the question becomes sort of how can we make it reasonable in terms of cost to be able to get these out to patients? I think that's exactly right.
And I feel like that's, to take it full circle, that's one of the conversations we had earlier about believing that a treatment will be affordable at the end of the day. Right, in terms of actually democratizing who gets medicine and having diversity in clinical trials or addressing, women's health as a serious concern for the industry, that the economics part of it just can't be ignored.
It's always there. It's always there underlying everything. Dan, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to touch on today?
No, I mean, this has been a lot of fun, John, and you're great at this. I feel like we had a good conversation.
We had a great conversation.
I
learned a lot, and that's always my sort of self-absorbed metric of, did I learn something? And that's always, I always hope that people watching with us learn something as well. And I can't imagine they wouldn't out of our conversation today. So that's great.
And I know I'm weird. I have unique takes on a lot of those things, but hopefully you don't get any thumbs down or lose any followers for anything.
No, diverse takes are good. Diverse takes, that I think people really look for basically real information that comes from on the ground. You talk to founders every day. And I think people look for something that isn't necessarily the standard line in terms of a perspective, because again, they want to learn something and be challenged. And I think, you bring both of those, which is really valuable.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Dan, very much for doing this.
I'm going to drop, but a couple of things I was going to ask is, let me know when you're going to edit this and if you need anything else from me, but also, I still want to get together with you and Scott and come down and visit.
Yes.
And the last thing is, if there's any other guests that you want to put on this, let me know. I'm always happy to bang on doors for
Oh,
this.
that would be great. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you know everybody, so that would be great.
Well, and it's also a time right now where there's a lot of great people that are trying to increase their range and image.
Yes.
And there's a lot of great people that are out of work that are finally able to kind of say more,
take time, and yeah.
and actually do this stuff that want to get a message out there. And like you said, I talked to a lot of founders, and I think every founder is looking for a platform to tell their story right now.
Yeah.
So
no, that's true.
Just let me know how you want to grow it.
That I really appreciate.
I can keep you busy. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is incredibly valuable, Dan. You have no idea. Thank you. Let me just see if Scott's out here. Hold on a second. I'll just have him pop in and say hello. Hold on one second. Do you have 1 minute, or you?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just going to email them now and tell them I'm running late.
No, if you're running late, we can do it. I don't want to keep you.
Oh, it's no big deal. It's all social here. Let me see if I can.
He's on the phone with his mother, and her air conditioning died. So,
well,
he said he will catch up with you and say hello.
You have to give it some credit. At least it made it through the beginning of this week. So if it was a day to die, it's going to be 60 and rainy tomorrow. So at least it died at the right time. It's a lot better than Tuesday when it was 101.
Yeah. We've been dealing with anyway. Well, you've had it with the in-laws. I mean, his mother is wonderful. I love his mother, but I feel the same way about mine. Yeah. See, these things are a lot of work. Dan, I don't want to keep you because I know you got another meeting, but thank you very, very much.
But I feel bad. I want to keep hanging out and talking. I feel bad that I got another meeting here. So we have to get together soon.
You have to do your job. You just started.
That's true. You
can't be sloppy the first week. Wait till the second week.
Sounds good.
All right, Dan. Thank you again.
Of course. Thanks, John. We'll talk soon.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.